Welcome to Christ for Life. Today we're going to talk about a topic that at some point in life we all have to deal with. It's one of the most grievous situations that any of us will find ourselves in, and that is in a situation of broken trust. It is very, very painful when someone breaks their trust. Someone that you've placed your faith in, someone that you relied on, and they prove untrustworthy. It's one of the hardest lessons that we have to learn, that not everyone is trustworthy. And so today we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how to deal with it biblically, this idea of broken trust. And one thing to remember is that in many ways, broken trust is harder to get back than the original trust that was given to that person. It's like a fence. It is easier to build a fence from scratch than to have to tear one down that's already dilapidated and rebuild it, because you have all kinds of rubble that you have to remove. And that's the way it is with trust as well. When someone breaks trust, now you have all this rubble in the relationship that must be dealt with before you can rebuild trust. Oh friend, I can tell you, trust is harder to rebuild than to give or grant in the first place. And so today we want to look at how to begin to rebuild trust. First of all, we have to understand that forgiveness is the first thing that we need to offer. Now, I understand forgiveness is a difficult thing, but forgiveness should be less an appeal to the emotion than it is an act of the will. In other words, that once we get beyond looking at our offering forgiveness as something that we're emotional about, and more we look at our will and say, by the will of God, because He wants us to forgive as we have been forgiven. If I make the offer of forgiveness more an act of will according to the holiness of God rather than my emotion, it's a lot easier to grant forgiveness. And so I have a couple of thoughts that I wanted to share with you. One is I want to begin with the model prayer. I want to look at Luke 11, verses 1 through 4. Let's take a look at that real quickly. He was praying in a certain place, and when he finished, one of his disciples said to him, "Lord, teach us to pray, just as John also taught his disciples." He said to them, "Whenever you pray, say, Father, your name be honored as holy. Your kingdom come. Give us each day our daily bread, and forgive us our sins, for we ourselves also forgive everyone in debt to us, and do not bring us into temptation." And so this idea that extending forgiveness should be less an appeal to our emotion than a holy act of the will. It should be an act of the will. And the reality is, you don't need to be somebody's punching bag. Let me hasten to say that. That's very important. Is that when someone breaks trust, they hurt you or someone you love. It doesn't mean that you have to continuously be hurt by them. You don't have to be someone's punching bag. But ultimately, we are called to forgive them. Now, reconciliation is a harder thing, because reconciliation has to be something that both parties agree to. And maybe they don't want to be reconciled to you, but nonetheless, we forgive them. And get this, ultimately, if they do want to reconcile, we look at the fruit in their life. Are they bearing fruit in keeping with restoring trust? If they're not, then you've forgiven them and you can move on. But you don't have to continue the reconciliation process if they're not willing to bear fruit according and in keeping with restoring trust. But forgive we must. And I love a quote by Robert Murray McCheyne. He lived in the 1800s from 1813 to 1843. And this is his quote. And now think about this as I'm reading this quote, this idea of forgiveness and being like Christ, because forgiveness is Christ-likeness. When we forgive others, we are so like Christ, because after all, He did forgive us as sinners separated from God. He forgave us. "Oh, that I might abide in the bosom of Him who washed Judas's feet and dipped his hand in the same dish with him and warned him and grieved over him, that I might catch the infection of His love, of His tenderness, so wonderful, so unfathomable." And friend, I can tell you that right now, if you're dealing with this very injurious situation where somebody has broken your trust, friend, I can tell you that the first thing we must do is forgive them in keeping with the holiness of God, the righteousness of God, the statutes of God, we must forgive them. That doesn't mean being victimized by them on an ongoing basis. No, we can separate ourselves from them, but forgive we must. Because at the end of the day, forgiveness is less an appeal to our emotion and more an act of will according to the holiness of God. Friend, I hope that in your life right now, if a fence of trust has been broken, torn down, that in order to remove the rubble, you'll begin with forgiveness. Let that be the starting point. Restoration may come later, but forgiveness is the first step. And when you forgive, you'll see that your heart is healed and mended. God bless you. We'll see y'all soon.